All right, today's daf is daf ches, and we are on the last line of Zayin Amud Base 7b. So we saw yesterday that the obligation of B'digas Chametz, the mitzvah of checking for Chametz, is not only. Let's see. Is it okay if I mute whoever's not muted? Or can you mute yourselves? Unless you have a question. Okay, thank you. Okay, start again. We're at the bottom of 7b, Zayin Amud Base, Tana Rabbanan. Yesterday, we saw that the obligation of checking for chametz requires a candle, and we saw some drashas why there's an obligation to have a candle for the checking of chametz. And the Gemara says, Tana Rabbanan, the Brisa taught, Ein bodkin es hachametz, ein bodkin lo raner. You do not check for chametz, not use lo rachama. You can't use sunlight. V'lo or halavana. Nor would you use moonlight. V'lo or havuka. You wouldn't use a large flame, a torch. Elul or aner. Rather, you only use candlelight. And this is something we saw yesterday, and the Brisa here also is going to bring the same verses, that there's a reason to have candlelight over other light, and we had a drasha from a pasuk, and today the Gemara is going to give us also some practical reasons. So the Gemara says, Mipnei, and we are now on Ches Amud Aleph 8a, Mipnei she'or haner yafal b'dika, because the light of a candle is actually beneficial for the checking for chametz. V'afa pishein ra'ila davar, and even though we don't have a proof from the text, Zeichel davar, we have a pasuk, a verse that is going to be a hint to this idea. Shanamar, as it says, and we saw these yesterday, Shivas Yom Sa'arli Matzah B'Vatechem. The Torah says you shall not find chametz in your house 7 days. So we see that it's an idea of looking and finding. It says it by Binyamin. They began with the checking for the goblet that Yosef had hid in the sack of Binyamin. That they started with the older brothers, Uvakatan Kila, and they ended with Binyamin, the youngest, Vayimatze, and they found it. So you see that finding takes seeking. And it also says, and Hashem says, I will seek through Yerushalayim with candles. It says, that the candle of Hashem, which is the soul, seeks within the innards of a person. So we see seeking and finding is through searching with a candle. Hi or hacham. So Gemara says, okay, so in what scenario did we say that we would not have b'dikas chametz done with the light of a candle, but rather with light of a sun is not beneficial, only light of a candle. Hechidomi. So what's the case? Are we talking about in a courtyard where you have ample sunlight? Rava said, actually, you don't have to check your courtyards and your gardens for chametz, because you have ravens and you have other birds and the like that will eat all the chametz that you have out there. So that actually outdoors doesn't require checking for chametz. Ella ba'achsadr. So it must be that we're talking about in a gazebo, and this is an open space that has a roof over it, perhaps, but it is open space. Well, Rava actually said that the achsadra would be checked by daylight because there's ample sunlight, and so you can check over there with the sun, and that's going to be sufficient to check for chametz. So Gemara says, rather, this is to a skylight in the room. Now the Gemara says, okay, so where do you want to check based on the skylight? Are we talking about that you're checking it directly at the sunlight? That's exactly like the achsadra, and indeed you are allowed to use sunlight for checking it. Rather, it's off to the sides. And when you're at the side of this achsadra, the side of this aruba, of this window, that would be, even though that there is sunlight, but there's enough shade cast off to the side, and you may not see the chametz that you need to see. And we'll see the same idea with the torch, that sometimes more light is not beneficial for looking, because the more light you have directly in front of you, the tighter your pupils get, and then the less you can see in a darker area that's right in front of it. And so the sunlight coming in actually makes it harder to see off to the side than if there was no sunlight coming in. And with a torch, you cannot check for chametz. And Rava, what about this teaching that Rava said? It says in Chabakuk, and the Navi says, and the light, the illumination for the tzaddikim will be like the light of the 7 days of creation, enormous light. Karnayim miyodolon, and it'll be these rays of shine from Hashem that will be gifted to the tzaddikim. Nevertheless, v'sham chaviyanuza, but the light of Hashem is going to be even stronger. So he explains, Lamat tzaddikim doimin b'fnei shechina. What are tzaddikim like in front of the Shekhinah? Kener b'fnei avuka. It's like a candle in front of a torch, a large fire. V'amar Rava, and furthermore, Rava said, avukal havdalah mitzvah amuvcha, to have instead of just a single candle, have a multiple light candle, which is a torch, is the greater mitzvah for Havdalah. So for Havdalah, we don't have a single candle, we have a multiple wick candle or a torch, something that has a larger fire. So we see that that's a greater light. So why would you say for lighting, for checking for chametz, that for seeking something, a single candle is better, and that the sunlight is not beneficial when it's off to the side? Amar Nachman Yitzchak, so the first distinction of Nachman Yitzchak says that a candle you can take up to the crevices. A torch you can't take to the crevices because it's a danger, and you can't get it into the crevices to look for the crevices and look inside to see what's there. Rav Zvida Amar, the candle illuminates what's in front of it. A torch it only illuminates what's behind it, meaning what's between the person and the fire. And I think the explanation is what I mentioned before, that the more light you have directly in front of you, your eyes respond to that, and the pupils narrow, which means that a space in front of that's dark is going to be much more difficult to see. Whereas a candle, which does not cast that large, that strong a light, will give enough light to illuminate the space in front of it, but allow your eyes to still retain the night vision that it needs. Rav Papa Amar, Hai ba'is v'hai loy ba'is. Rav Papa says another distinction with a candle, you're not afraid to take it around the house to look for things. With a torch in a house, you're afraid that it may cause a fire. Ravina Amar, Hai mashach by miktif iktufi. Another distinction with a candle, the flame is calm, so it just keeps the fire in one place basically, and you can look around. With a torch, the fire is jumping, and as such, it casts shadows the whole time because the light changes from space to space, and it's more difficult to check. So in any case, even though that a torch does create greater light, and for Havdalah, that is a better way of doing Havdalah, to have more than one wick, to have a multiple source light as your candle. For checking for chametz, it is appropriate to have a single wick candle, and that candle itself is going to illuminate and give enough light that you can see in the dark and take it into the crevices, and it will not and will allow you to see even beyond into the dark. The next halacha is going to deal with where do you need to check. In the Mishnah it said, all places that you take chametz into, that it's common to take chametz into, need to be checked. Kol makom lasiyimai. Why does it say all places, as opposed to just places that you bring in chametz? So all places is adding to you lasuya hadatan rabbanan. It's adding this brisa that we learned. Holes in the wall of a house, whether they are very high up on the wall or very low down on the wall, since those are not practical to store things in or really to reach into, and so it's not likely that you're going to need to take anything out of there or put something into there. And so we don't have to be concerned that there's chametz there that you stored there or that you're going to need to take it out. By the way, in halacha, the poskim say that this would not be true for someone who has toddlers or young children in the house, because they get chametz into anywhere. But assuming that this isn't a typical space, then the assumption is that you wouldn't store chametz in a hole in the wall that's low down or very high up, and so you don't have to check for chametz there. However, the wall and the holes in between in the middle of the wall, you may use that as storage. V'gaga yitzia, also the top of a shed. The house roofs, as we've seen in Erevin, were basically flat, but the shed in whether outside in the courtyard, a shed roof was usually made slanted like our roofs, and therefore you're not likely to store something on it, even though sheds were pretty low. So you could put something on it, but it wouldn't remain there because it would slide off. So you don't have to check for that. The gaga migdal, and the top of a cabinet. Since the cabinet is made to put some food into, the assumption is you wouldn't put it on top of. Again, this is personal. If somebody does store stuff on items on top of their cabinet, so then they would have to check there. But generally, you don't have to, because the cabinet you put things into as opposed to on top of. V'refes bakar, and a animal barn. V'lulin, and a chicken coop. Those, you assume the animals would have eaten it if there were any chametz there, so you don't have to check there. Umitmen, and a hay storage room, and wine storage room, and oil storage. Those do not require checking, because again, why would you have chametz in there? These are storage for hay, wine, and oil. And the assumption is there's no chametz there. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, if you have a mita, you have a bed, which splits through the house. So it's in the house, and it divides the room, meaning it's running through the room. And there's a gap. So Rashi learns this gap is beneath the bed, and since it has a gap beneath the bed, so you could store chametz there, so you have to check beneath it. Shricha badika, you have to check. Tosa says that we're talking about that the bed splits the house completely. In order to get to the other side of the house, you have to climb over the bed, and therefore the assumption is that there's no chametz on the other side of that bed, and you only have to check where the chametz is likely to have gone, and the other side of the room would be assumed to be chametz free. If that's the scenario in your house, and that's fine. Either way, the idea is anywhere that chametz is not likely to go to, you don't need to check. Wherever chametz is likely to go to, you do need to check. Very minimum. So we ask a contradiction. This previous brisa had said that the holes in the wall above and below, all the way up and all the way down, don't need to be checked. And we have a brisa that says chorsha bein adam l'chaveru. There's a hole in the wall between two neighbors, a person and a friend. Each side has to check for their chametz as far in as their hands can get in. That's how far they have to go. So even if it's a very thick wall, you have to check on only up to as far as the hand goes. And if there's any space in between the two, so then that neither can reach, so then you would have to have a bitul belev, a nullification in the heart, and say, okay, that chametz is out of reach. We can't get it anyhow. If it's mine, I nullify it. A house that splits through the house, ve'etzim, or a pile of wood that splits through the room, va'avanim, or a rock, stone, sedurim, tachtel, if they are arranged neatly, tachtel beneath it, umafsekes, and there's a gap in the space beneath it, so there's a pile, but there's also a space beneath it. Eina tzricha bedika. Since it splits the room, umafsekes, eina tzricha bedika. Even if there's space beneath it, it does not need checking for chametz. So we have a contradiction. Kasha mita mita. In the previous brisa, it said that beneath the bed and the other side of the bed need checking, and this brisa says it does not need. Kasha chor nachor. And there's also a contradiction in the first part of the brisa, which says that if you have a hole, you do need to check for chametz. And here it says the previous brisa said you do not have to check for chametz in a hole, and here it says you do have to check in the hole between the neighbors. So that's an easy one. There's no contradiction. The first brisa is talking about the holes at the top and the bottom of the wall where you're not likely to use it, and therefore you don't have to assume there's chametz there or that you're going to get the chametz from it. And this is in the middle of the wall where it's common to use that hole for items that for chametz to store and so on, and therefore you need to get the chametz out of there. Mita lekasha, and there's no contradiction in regards to the beds either. Ha de midalye, ha de mitatai. There's a distinction of if it's a very high bed, there's enough space that you can easily use something beneath it. So then you're going to have to check beneath the bed. If it's a low bed, even if there's some gap there, but you're not storing anything there, and if you did, you're not going to crawl under to get it. So therefore, you don't have to. Since it's not it's not a usable space for storage, you don't have to assume there's any chametz there, and you don't have to clean it out. Now the Gemara is going to ask a contradiction from the first brisa, which says that you don't have to check wine cellars. So the Gemara says, is that really true that a wine cellar doesn't need to be checked for chametz? But we have a brisa that says it says that wine cellars do need to be checked. And only an oil storage does not need to be checked for chametz. So Gemara says, well, it depends what kind of wine cellar. Is it the wine cellar where you keep your wine to age and get ready, or is it the wine cellar that you actually have the wines that are ready to go, and you go in there whenever you need a wine? So if it's just your wine storage in the production section of the wine, so you're not actually going in there when you need wine, that's where you just store it. So that doesn't need to be checked for chametz, because why would you walk in there with food? And so you don't have to have that checked. Where do you need to be checked for chametz? This is the personal use wine cellar, meaning you have a room where you keep the wines that you're constantly replenishing your table with. That needs checking for chametz, because perhaps in the middle of the meal you ran out of wine and you needed to go get another bottle, so you went in there to get some more wine, and whoever walked in was carrying a piece of bread, and then they got the wine and they put down the bread to get it, and left the bread there, and it's still there. So Gemara says, well, if that's the case, that this is just like a pantry, this is a wine cellar where you're actually going to get your stuff, so oil should be the same. That this is an oil cellar, that your oil storage, where you're constantly going to get fresh oil. So even in the middle of a meal, you may get it. So Gemara says, no, there's a distinction between wine and oil. Oil is a kind of product that you need a limited amount during the meal. You need it for the food prep. You maybe need it for a dipping sauce and so on. But all that prior to the meal. So shemen yeshlo keva la'achila, you know approximately what you're going to need for the meal, and you have it prepared before the meal. You're not going to run out in the middle and get some more oil. However, yayin, wine, you never know how much people are going to have. Could be you're going to have 1 cup, could be everybody's going to have a second or a third. In kevalashtia, there's no set amount for drinking, and you could run out and need another bottle during a meal. So that's a common occurrence, and therefore you have to check the wine cellar where you're bringing the bottles to the table or the wine to the table in middle of the meal. Whereas oil, that's not a common occurrence that you're going to have to get oil in the middle of the meal, because that's something you can estimate and prior to the meal and not need to get up and go in the middle. Tani Rabbi Chia, Asu itzris shechar bebavel kaitzis yaimi Eretz Yisrael b'mistapik. Beer was the drink of Bavel, as much as wine was the drink of Eretz Yisrael, and therefore the beer cellars that people use to get beer during the meal was similar in Bavel to the halacha of wine in Eretz Yisrael. Just as wine in Eretz Yisrael, we said that since that's something common for a person to need to get in the middle of the meal, and therefore it counts as likely to have chametz in it. So to the beer in Bavel was the same. Was likely that the person would have gotten beer in the middle of the meal, and they need to check it for chametz. Amar Rav Chisda, beidagim etzarach bedika. Rav Chisda said that a fish pond that you had also does not need to be checked for chametz. Vatanya tzricha medika, but we have a brisa that says that a fish pond does require checking for chametz. Lakasha al-baravari al-bezutri. Large fish, those there you'd get it before the meal and prepare it for the meal. They also had these small fish that they would eat, and sometimes they would these storage of wherever they kept these small fish, they would need to get more in the middle of the meal. So think the difference between a salmon and a sardine, right? Sardines you could have, run out and want some more. So that needs to be checked, because in the middle of the meal you may want more. A larger fish, this is what you have for the meal. You're not going to get another one in the middle, and because it should whatever you got before the meal would have sufficed. Amar Rabba Bar Huna, Beimilchi Beikiri Tzarach Bedika. The salt storage as well as the wax storage, both of which could run out in the middle of the meal, you're going to need more, also need to be checked for chametz. Amar Papa Beit Tzivi Ubeit Tamri Tzarach Bedika. Rav Papa said similarly, the wood pile where you keep your wood for the stove, as well as where you keep the dates, also need bedika. These are also things that could run out in the middle of the meal and were staples that they would constantly go for, and therefore the assumption is that it could be that in the middle of the meal someone went to get it with the food in their hand and left it there, and there could be chametz in there. But generally, you assume that a storage area doesn't have chametz in it unless there's you store chametz there, or it's something that you go to that is common in the middle of the meal to need more, and you may have gone to get some, and that's going to be a storage area that requires checking. Tana. There's a brisa that teaches that you don't have to stick your hand into a hole in the wall or crevices in the wall to check for chametz. Why? Mipnei hasakana, because of the danger that there is in such a requirement. And so the danger is significant enough that you're exempt for checking for chametz there. So my sakana, what danger are we talking about in regards to checking for chametz in such a place? Are we talking about that if you're in a crevice you may encounter a scorpion? Then why would you, if that's the kind of place that would have a scorpion, of course you don't have to check for chametz there, because why would you use it for chametz, right? You can't stick your hand in to retrieve whatever you put in there, because because there's a danger of a scorpion. So clearly, if you're using it for chametz, then you would have to check whether there's some left in there, because there's no danger of scorpion because you felt comfortable putting something in it. So rather, the case is you're checking for a hole. You had a hole in the wall that you used for storage, and that wall collapsed, and you don't know was there chametz in there or not. And now there's a concern that if you start sticking your hand in to see, there may be a scorpion in it. Well, if it collapsed, why would you even have to check it all? That's covered. That chametz is removed from you by the very nature of it being covered by rubble. Tanan, we learned chametz a chametz that a collapsed wall, which is called a mapolis, a pile of rubble, fell over it. That is in fact removed from your possession. So the Gemara says no. There's a distinction. There, the reason you don't need to check for it, and it's considered completely removed from you, it's such a deep pile of rubble that a dog cannot smell it. In other words, it's more than 3 tefachim deep that a dog it won't even try and get to it. Whereas hacha, here we're talking about where a dog is sniffing for it, and so it's not that deep in the rubble. And nevertheless, you don't have to check there on account of the danger, since you don't know whether there's chametz or not. If you knew for sure there was chametz, then you would have to go and get a shovel and carefully remove the rubble to get to the chametz. But over here, you're checking if there's any chametz there. You don't know if there is or isn't, so therefore you don't have to check. Gemara says, well, since it's a mitzvah to check for chametz, so what are we afraid of about scorpions? We know that Rabbi Elazar taught anybody on a mission to do a mitzvah will not get, has a special protection and will not get injured doing that mitzvah. Well, we're afraid that while he's checking for chametz, since this is a collapsed wall, he may be looking for some other items of his own that he had lost there. And he's going to say the example is a needle, but whatever it may be, he may be looking for some personal items while he's checking for chametz, and that's a problem. You can't say that you have the protection of a mitzvah when you're doing something personal. So Gemara says, is that really true? When I'm doing a mitzvah, and I have some personal needs and wants I'm doing while I'm doing the mitzvah, I don't have the protections of the mitzvah. But Tani, we learned, somebody gives tzedakah and says, I give this coin to tzedakah, but I'm doing so with the intent that the merit should save my son's life who is ill. Or somebody says, or I do it in order that I have the merit in the world to come. So you're doing it for a personal gain as well, but you're intending for the mitzvah, and you're intending for the mitzvah on its own as well. So we turn to Chesed Amud Beis. This mitzvah is done with complete righteousness. So we see that the fact that he's doing it for himself as well has no bearing on the mitzvah. The mitzvah still counts as a valid mitzvah. So Gemara says, you're right. If he was checking for his own things while checking for chametz, that's not a problem. The problem is that he may have looked for chametz and either not found or removed the chametz already. And now, when after he's finished checking for chametz, he continues checking for his own items. That's not at the time of the mitzvah anymore, and that would not count as a protection. However, Rav Nachman Yitzchak says, no, that's a misunderstanding. It's not in regards to checking for chametz and the danger of a scorpion, but rather it's the danger of what the neighbor is going to think. The danger of a non-Jewish neighbor who thinks you're doing some sort of black magic on him. Or plimo. And this is the opinion of Plimo. The Tani we learned, a hole between a Jew's property and a non-Jew's property. He can check until where his hand can reach, and the rest he can nullify in his heart. However, Plima says no, don't check it at all. Don't check for chametz in that hole at all. So Gemara says, "My sakana, what danger is there? Inay misakanas kshafim. If you're afraid of the magic, ki ishtamish hechi ishtamish. Why would you even put chametz into there? That he's going to think that you're a sorcerer and you're doing some black magic on him. So why would you even be putting items into there for storage?" So Gemara says, no, there's a distinction. Hasam ki ishtamish imama nohira v'loy masik adayti. When I put the items in there, it's during the day. I'm in my courtyard and I need to store something, so I stick it into the hole in the wall, and I'm going to take it out also during the daytime. So the neighbor won't notice and won't even won't see that I'm using that hole in the wall. But over here, it's at night. I'm in my courtyard on the wall against that's between the two properties, and I got a candle and I'm looking inside the wall. That's going to scare him, and he's going to think, what's going on? What's this guy doing? And he's going to think that there's some sort of sorcery going on, and then it could become dangerous. And he's going to notice, and he's going to be concerned and come after the Jew. And therefore, Plimo says, don't check for chametz. So that's the danger that is going on, and that's why this brisa says you don't check because of the danger. Whereas if it's between two Jews, then each one checks the full depth that their hand can reach. So the Gemara says, but you're doing a mitzvah, and Rabbi Elazar said that somebody doing a mitzvah will not get harmed. So the Gemara says, yes, that's up to a limit. If you're actually doing something dangerous, then that you're not protected from that. When you're doing something typical and normal for a mitzvah, then you can assume that nothing dangerous would happen to you, nothing harmful would happen to you. Whereas if you're doing something that it itself is dangerous, you say, I'm doing it for a mitzvah. Yeah, but that's entering a war zone. You can't say, I'm entering a war zone, but I'm doing it for mitzvah, so I won't get injured. That shchicha hazeka, the damage, the injuries there, the danger there is so great that it's typical to happen. So you cannot.
We can't hear you. You're muted. Okay.
Shmuel was told Shem that go and anoint David as a new king after Shaul lost the kingship. And Shmuel says, I'm afraid Shaul's going to realize that I'm not here, that I went somewhere, and he's going to say, and he's going to kill me. Vayomer Shmuel, Eich Elech, how can I go and anoint David? V'shama Shaul, Shaul is going to hear, V'harguni, and he's going to kill me as someone a traitor, someone who is essentially creating a coup against the king. Vayomer Hashem, and Hashem said, no, take a calf and say you're going to bring an offering, etc. But what we see is that even though Hashem commanded him to do something, Shmuel was afraid for his life. How can you tell me shluchim mitzayin in azukin? But with Shaul, that was a common danger. That was a real danger that you can't just assume nothing's going to happen. By my name, Merav. Rav was asked this question. Hani b'nei Rav, these students of Rav, the diary bebaga, they live out in a bog, right? The old word baga, which is a swampy, plains that are in a lowland, and they were outside of the city, and it was dangerous to walk back in and out during the dark. Can they come early before sunrise to the academy to study, because it takes them some time to get here? And can they leave early, even though when it's still dark, in order to get to the academy and study on time? Amaluhu naisi, let them come alive al savari, upon me and my shoulders. In other words, I take responsibility. There is no danger will happen to them when coming into study Torah. Nasal mind. What about returning, leaving, and going back at night? Can they also, after the studies, they're coming back from doing a mitzvah? Can they leave after it's dark already, or do they have to leave with enough time to get back while it's still light? So he said, well, actually, I don't know the answer to that. That's a good question. I don't know whether that's still under the protection of mitzvah or not. Itmar, Amar Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar said, Shlucha mitzvah ein nizokin. However, Rabbi Lazar is of the opinion, even though Rav was not sure about this, Rabbi Lazar said that anybody doing a mitzvah will not be injured, not only on the way going to the mitzvah, but even in the return. Come on, like whose opinion is this? Kahai Tanya, like this brisa. The Tana Isi ben Yehuda Omer, Isi ben Yehuda taught. Klapisha Amar Torah. Since we learn this from the fact that the Torah said, go ahead and go on the pilgrimage, go do Aliyah Regel 3 times a year. You're going to leave wherever you are in the north, the south, the east, and the west of the country. You're going to go to Yerushalayim. The entire country is going to go and make Aliyah Regel. Well, that's a pretty scary thing to do, because when you do that, you're leaving all your lands exposed, and the neighbors can just come in and conquer it. Lo yachmed ishas artzacha, the Torah says, don't worry. No neighbor is going to covet your land, and they're not going to come in and steal your land. Which teaches that your cow is going to be out in the pasture. And no animal is going to come in and injure it. Your chicken is going to be pecking away at the trash pile. And no weasel is going to come out and get it. And then we have a kal v'chomer, a illogical extension. These animals, which are common for them to get attacked and injured, during the Aliyah L'Regel, they will not be injured. But humans, which have a protection and a direct providence from Hashem, therefore, they are less likely to get injured. Al achas kama v'kama, how much more so that when they do the mitzvah, they will be protected and don't have to worry. But that's only while they're going to the pilgrimage, to the Aliyah L'Regel, and doing the mitzvah. How about when they come back? Talmud Loimar, because it says in regards to Aliyah L'Regel, Fanisa Baboker, and you will turn in the morning, and you will go back to your tents, everything will be in place. It means you will go and find your tent in peace. The Gemara says, well, if in the return you have the protection from the mitzvah, why do I even need to teach you that on the way there you have a protection? Look at the Rabbi Ami. So rather, this is a teaching for another teaching of Rabbi Ami. The Amar Rabbi Ami, as Rabbi Ami taught, Kol Adam Sheish Lo Karka, anybody that owns land in Eretz Yisrael, Ola L'Regel, is required to do Aliyah L'Regel, to go up for the pilgrimage. Ve'she'ein Lo Karka, anybody that doesn't have land in Eretz Yisrael, Ein Ola L'Regel, is not required to go up to do Aliyah L'Regel. This is the opinion of Rabbi Ami, that you don't have to do Aliyah L'Regel if you don't have land. Tosas says that this is the halacha, and therefore says a few days ago we saw Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava was out in Nitzivin and didn't come for the pilgrimage, and so he entrapped this Aramean that was eating that was the imposter who was saying he was a Jew and eating of the Korban Pesach. In there, why didn't he come himself? So Tosas says because he wasn't obligated. He lived so far and didn't have land in Eretz Yisrael, so he was exempt. However, the Rambam does not say this is the halacha, and says even if somebody does not have land, does require Aliyah L'Regel, as Rav over here has the other teaching from this verse, that it's there to teach you that on the way to do a mitzvah, you're exempt. On the way to do a mitzvah, you're protected. Amar Rabbi Avin bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Ma'im Peres Genusa B'Yerushalayim. Once you talk about the pilgrimage Aliyah L'Regel, Rabbi Yitzchak says you should know that the reason why Yerushalayim doesn't have the delicious fruits that the Kinneret area has is so the people that come for the pilgrimage, they should not say, that it would be sufficient to just come up for these fruits, and they will forget the primary reason they came, to be close to Hashem and to connect with Hashem on the Chag. And then they would be coming up for the pilgrimage for the wrong reasons. Similarly, Rabbi Tzvi the son of Rabbi Yanai, said, why are the hot springs of Tveria in Tveria not in Yerushalayim? And it would be sufficient to just go up for the Aliyah Regel, just for the hot springs, and they'd forget the main reason that they're there. And that would be the wrong reasons for going up to Yerushalayim. So therefore, Yerushalayim doesn't have the best fruit of Eretz Yisrael or these amenities like hot springs. And this way, anybody coming for Aliyah L'Regel is coming for the mitzvah itself. We'll leave it at that. Tomorrow we'll start with the storage room, Machlokes of Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, of where you, in a wine storage room, you have to check for a chametz.
Yasher Koach.
Yeah.
Yasher Koach. Make it a great day. Okay.
I hope to have it.